We are back on MorningLine. Thanks for joining us. Our guest, Dr. Erin Calipari. She is from Vanderbilt, where she's an assistant professor, among other things, of pharmacology. And as you see on the screen, we're talking about opioid addiction, the fentanyl aspect of it. And again, I think this is a different angle that we haven't covered as much. And from her perspective, it's on the chemistry and how it really affects us, as opposed to the law enforcement side of it and the overdoses, which we've seen so much. And I really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks.
It's a good conversation, and we've got some callers. The number's up if you'd like to jump in. Drew waited through the break. Drew, good morning. Hi, Drew.
How are you today, Nick?
Good. What's on your mind?
Well, I'm thinking, wouldn't making marijuana legal go a long ways to dropping your fentanyl deaths? But try telling the state lawmakers that. I mean, they've been voting marijuana down for years and years and years.
It's so interesting.
We were just talking about this over the break.
Yeah, you read our mind, Drew. He didn't hear us during the break.
Yeah.
But I did ask her during the break, not to get too far off base, but the question, and many of you do call and say that you've gotten pain relief from marijuana replacing opioids. Of course, it remains illegal in Tennessee. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, man, I have thoughts.
Not political aspect of it.
No, I know. But I think we were thinking, and this is kind of my take, is that I think that there's two things that dictate how available drugs are, and one of them is scientific evidence, research, and the whatnot. And then the other is kind of political policy. Mm-hmm. And ideally, this would be one and one, right? Ideally, the policy would be entirely driven by the evidence and what we have. And I don't think in the case of marijuana that that's exactly what is happening. I don't want to go too far down this path, but I think there's a lot of evidence coming out, and actually in the Addiction Center at Vanderbilt, a lot of people studying different cannabinoid drugs that may have different therapeutic actions as opposed to just THC. Right. Looking at cannabinoids and CBD, other cannabinoids, and how that comes out. There's actually quite a bit of evidence. Yasmin Hurd's group at Mount Sinai just had a really cool study in humans showing that CBD during withdrawal or during abstinence reduced craving. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's a lot of evidence coming out for these opioid drugs that will be maybe more refined than just smoking weed, but how do we use what we know about
and what
that?
is it you said? I'm just wondering, when it comes to pain, and I know your specialty is not cannabis, but what opioid affects what again? The receptor on pain?
So there's CB1 and CB2 receptors in the brain.
Okay, but does the marijuana go to the same place? Can that affect pain as well?
It can affect pain, but it's not through opioid receptors. It's through a different mechanism, which is actually, I think, why people are starting to study how this works. Now, here's one of the issues. When there's a federal or state-based law about marijuana being illegal, it becomes very difficult for us as researchers to get access to it in the lab. So for me, I actually have a DEA drug license, and there's different schedules of drugs. So drugs are either Schedule 1, Schedule 2, down on. So I have a Schedule 2 license that gives me access to things like cocaine, methamphetamine. So Schedule 2 means anything that is potentially addictive or dangerous, but has approved medical value. So the reason cocaine is Schedule 2 is because it's used in ocular surgeries, because it's a local anesthetic. Okay.
Opioids are Schedule 2?
Some of them are. Fentanyl is Schedule 2, so I have access to fentanyl.
So fentanyl is Schedule 2, but marijuana is Schedule 1.
Yes. And I think that this is part of the issue. So now, not only do we not have enough research on it, because we don't have enough research, it's hard to kind of...
And you can't, because it's Schedule 1.
And it doesn't, and it's federally, I think, and I'm pretty sure, don't quote me on it, that the federal laws really matter. So even in states where you can buy it, so Colorado, you still have to go through the federal laws because we're getting funding from the federal government. Right. So even if you could go down the street and buy marijuana from a store, you still have to use specific THC that comes from the government to be within their legal. So essentially, what I think is there needs to be a lot more research on this. I think this is a really important area. I do think people are going down that path with cannabinoid drugs, things that act on the receptors but aren't necessarily marijuana. But there's also still limitations.
And on the question of addiction, I guess you hear time and again that marijuana, except maybe in some unusual circumstances, is not addicting.
You know what? Based on what I've seen, I wouldn't. I mean, the thing is, there can be I don't want to say absolutely no. So when you think about addiction, there's also dangerous patterns of use of things that we don't think of as addictive. So here's a great example: binge eating disorder, gambling. These are things that are not necessary. They're not drugs, right? But they still could have harmful patterns of behavior. People can't stop. And so I hesitate to say, no, it's not addictive, because obviously anything that we are reinforced by that we want to do again can have these harmful patterns.
That's an excellent point. So can you overdose on it?
You'd have to try really hard. No, not the amount that you would
marijuana.
have to take is so high that I don't want to say that that's probably. I'm sure someone will be able to find an example of it happening. It's very low. It's not at the same rate as things like nicotine, alcohol. You know, nicotine and alcohol are really interesting drugs, right? Because they're two of the most dangerous drugs that there are. They're the ones that cause death. They have the biggest burden on society. And so it's kind of funny, right? Because we, again, but back to the kind of policy pharmacology thing, as pharmacologists, you start to look and say, hey, these are really dangerous, but we don't always make things illegal based on
I know.
safety.
We have the sheriff come on every month, and he sits right where you're sitting, and he says the same thing. It's crazy, Nick. We've locked up so many people for marijuana over the years, even though not anymore in Davidson County, but you can just go down the road to the liquor store and buy something which, in his opinion, is worse than marijuana.
Yeah. Well, and it has,
if abused.
So here's it's not a fun fact. It's actually terrible. But withdrawal from a lot of drugs is not fatal. Withdrawal from opioids is really uncomfortable, but it's not necessarily fatal. Withdrawal from alcohol has to be monitored in a clinical setting because it can be fatal.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, is we look at these drugs and we say, okay, these are bad. Here's the thing: drug addiction is a major public health concern. It's one of the most expensive. It costs us billions of dollars each year. It's perplexing how expensive it is for society, how bad it is for people, but then how little money as a society and a government we put into research trying to solve this problem. We're one of the lowest funded institutes, NIDA, National Institute on Drug Abuse and National Institute on Alcoholism. That's who funds us for this research, and a little bit from the Cancer Center because smoking causes cancer. So a little bit there. But there are no, you think Race for the Cure, you think the American Heart Association. We don't have anything like that outside of the federal government that funds this kind of work, even though it's one of the most expensive, most burdensome things that affects everybody, not just the people who suffer from it.
That's why we do this show, because we need to get an understanding, a better understanding about how it affects the brain, not just blame necessarily the individual that becomes the addict, but understand why it happens, and then do what you said. We need to have other things to help deal with this, because it's costing billions of dollars. Let's take a call next from Tom. Tom, good morning. Hi, Tom.
Good morning. My question is, what is our governor doing about this problem? I'll stand by and listen.
but I guess we went that direction. We can't get political on this. I mean, at this point, the governor, with regard to this, he enforces the laws if it comes down to it. That's about it, Tom. We just can't go that way. It's not a political show on this, but look, all the states are looking, and lawmakers right now in the legislature, we have some medical marijuana bills on the table. Whether he would sign one if they passed, we'll have to wait and see. Let's go to Ann. Ann, good morning. Hi, Ann.
Good morning. I'm 65. Last week, as a matter of fact, and I've dealt with autoimmune disorders and pain since I was a teenager. 3 weeks ago, I finally, after 9 months, was told I was eligible to start injections. And today, I'm waiting to find out if I will get assistance in paying for my copay, which will be $1,400 a month. My physician wanted to increase the low-dose maintenance narcotic that I have taken for pain, that you have just given me a description that I can use with my family as dependent, possibly. And I refuse to have the amount increased, the dosage increased, because for years I have kept that pill at its lowest dose and its least amount that I could keep it at, so that I could not be accused and I could not be shamed, and I would not feel as though I was one of those that was being accused of being a drug fiend.
We got a lot of calls. And you hit on a really
That
important
is
point. And
such
should
an important way.
she shouldn't feel that way.
No.
And if she needed a little bit of a higher dose to really deal with the pain, and Ann's a tough customer, couldn't she? She should have.
This is, I think, so I don't want to give people medical advice, but but I think as a society, right, this kind of speaks to a bigger problem. Like the fact that our neighbors and our friends and our family feel that they're being judged for taking medication they need. Not only is that harmful to them, right? But think about how someone who needs help, you have a family member suffering from substance use disorder, and they feel like they're going to be judged, but they need help. When we create this narrative, right, that people who take drugs are bad people or they're a fiend or whatever, or we use this kind of language and we say, oh, well, these people are different than us. It is so harmful and it prevents people from getting help. You know, and I think this is the thing, is that as we have these conversations, right, and I'm so happy you're having me on here because this is such an important conversation, we start to hear stories from people who are people, they're our friends.
Right.
And you start to see that this is a big problem that is just like any other disorder. You know, if your friend gets cancer, you don't say, oh, well, you should have done something differently.
Right.
You say, how can we help? What can we do? And so we like to talk about addiction as a brain disorder. It is a disorder. There's genetic variables that make you more vulnerable. Once you're on this path, you need help, you need support from the community, you need to be able to afford to get access to help and support centers, and we need to be doing a better job, you know, understanding it and also making people feel comfortable either seeking treatment for pain if they don't have substance use disorder or seeking treatment for substance use disorder.
Let's take a break.
Okay.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, if you're on hold, stay there. More of your phone calls with our guest right after this. While you're talking